I know Scottish poems, I know Scottish songs, I go to burn suppers, I like tartan. You know, what makes me not patriotic just because I don't want independence?
In the run-up to the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, you're going to hear a lot of nonsense on both sides of the debate. You're going to see a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear-mongering and a lot of mudslung. You're going to get bombarded from both sides with statistics and numbers and bluster. And after a while, you might start to find the whole thing a little bit wearing. Hey, maybe you're already sick of it. The problem is, though, that no matter how confusing or how boring it gets, it doesn't really change the fact that it's important. Actually, it's really important. And it'll likely be the most important decision you or I are going to make in our entire lifetime. So, how on earth are we supposed to know what's true and what's not? Well, it's funny you should ask that. Buckle up, people, this won't take long. It's very much the best of the best, the creme de la creme. Time wasters need not apply for the top 10 Unionist myths debunked. At 10, it's one of the most dramatic arguments in the book, and one which at first glance seems almost entirely plausible. Have your documents at the ready, folks, for border controls between Scotland and England.
I don't want my kids, when they cross into Scotland, to have to carry a passport.
The No campaign would have us believe that this is an inevitability, but it's most definitely not. There are currently no passport controls between the UK and the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, which are not only outside the UK, they're not even part of the EU. Which brings us neatly onto number 9. This one was vying for the top spot for a while before No campaigners started to go suspiciously quiet about it recently. That is the claim that an independent Scotland would not be granted access to the EU. Well, there's no easy, straight yes-no answer to this one, although Prime Minister David Cameron could settle it quite easily by just officially asking the EU, something which he's refused point-blank to do.
Of course we will work with the Scottish Government in providing information, but let me be clear about what we won't do. We will not pre-negotiate Scotland's exit from the United Kingdom.
Certainly it looks extremely unlikely that Scotland would be denied continued membership, given its status as an oil-rich, energy-rich nation with an existing track record within the EU, but perhaps a more pertinent question would be, is the United Kingdom, in its current shape, really going to be a member of the EU for long anyway?
UKIP has, at the heart of our extensive manifesto, the key aim of ending Britain's membership of the EU.
Well, given that David Cameron has chosen to appease UKIP voters and Daily Mail readers in the southeast of England with a referendum on leaving the EU,
it will be an in-out referendum.
It seems more logical now to assume that the only way to safeguard Scotland's place within Europe is through independence. It's long since dropped from the top spot, but despite losing all credibility, it's clinging on to its place at number 8. That's right, it's that old chestnut. We're subsidised by Westminster and we couldn't survive on our own. Well, this argument is old news by now. Even David Cameron admits it's a myth, for goodness sake.
I'm not saying that Scotland couldn't make it on her own. Of course, Scotland could.
Well, for those people who've been hiding under a rock for the past 2 years, have some numbers. Scotland pays 9.4% of UK tax, with just 8.4% of the UK's population, which technically means we subsidise the rest of the UK. And a report last year from the Centre of Economics and Business Research, which sounds fairly impressive, I mean it's got the word centre and economics in it, concluded that Scotland received no net subsidy. In at 7, it's the UK Armed Forces. Scotland would be defenceless and lose thousands of military jobs. Well, sure, we might not be able to send troops off to invade Middle Eastern countries in direct contravention of international law, but well, we never really wanted to do that anyway.
I'm doing it because I think it's the right thing to do.
Seriously though, Scotland's share of defence spending is about 3.5 billion a year, of which less than 2 billion is actually spent in Scotland. So, even if we kept up defence spending exactly as it is now, we'd end up with 1.5 billion extra to play with, which should be nice. The thousands of jobs, though, that would supposedly be lost refers largely to the Clyde shipyards, who rely on the Royal Navy for contracts, although there's actually no reason that defence jobs in the Clyde would stop post-independence. In fact, it's even been suggested that they could do even better. At 6, like a bolt from the blue, it's an appeal to our good neighbourliness. We would be dooming England to perpetual Tory rule. On the face of it, this one does sound quite likely, and assuming that all Scots hate the Tories, which obviously we do, it seems a bit cruel to just dump them on the English. The thing is, though, we wouldn't. The idea that Scotland has any influence whatsoever over Westminster elections is a bit of a myth. Let's take a look. The 1945 Labour government, without Scotland's votes, would still have been Labour. The 1950 Labour government would still have been Labour. The 1951 Tory government would still have been Tory. 1955 would still have been Tory. 1959 would still have been Tory. The 1966 Labour government would still have been Labour. 1970 would still have been Tory. 1974 would still have been Labour. The 1979, oh my god, it's Thatcher Tory government, would still have been Tory. 1983 would still have been Tory. 1987 would still have been Tory. 1992 would still have been Tory. The 1997 landslide New Labour government would still have been New Labour. 2001 would still have been New Labour. And 2005, well, yeah, you guessed it. In fact, in 2010, Scotland voted exactly the same way that it did in 2005, and well, look what we ended up with. Not quite the same thing we had in 2005, that's for sure. I mean, look at it, it's got two heads this time. On to the home straight now, and in at number 5, it's all about Alex Salmond and the SNP.
We have a majority SNP government in the Scottish Parliament. That is not a democratic place in the conventional sense. It is a dictatorship of one man sitting in Butte House.
Yep, Alex Salmond is a bit like a dictator, and the SNP want to create a one-party state. In all fairness, this kind of chat is pretty common amongst opponents of popular politicians. We're just not that used to it in this country because we don't tend to get many popular politicians. Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, for example, is maligned by his opponents as a dictator and a tyrant, despite being democratically elected to office no less than 4 times.
I knew there were some dictators around the world. Hugo Chavez now admitting in a speech that went widely undocumented, by the way, that he chews cocoa.
The guy's a maniac. I mean, he's a clown. He's a maniac. Would you invite Hitler to lunch? I mean, would you invite Charles Manson to sit down and tell you how to run his life?
Likewise, Evo Morales, president of Bolivia, despite garnering over 64% of the popular vote. And if those examples are maybe a little bit too exotic, let's try something a wee bit more Western. I think we've all heard of this guy.
A dictatorship? A power grab? Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich says President Obama is making the biggest power grab in American history and moving America towards a dictatorship.
I think dictatorial is a strong word, but it may frighteningly be the right word.
So basically, if you're popular and even favour just a tiny bit of change from the status quo, you'll get called a dictator by your opponents. Alex Salmond isn't a dictator, he's the democratically elected First Minister of Scotland. Love him or loathe him, you have to accept that he's currently the only leader in the whole of the UK with a democratic majority. Check it if you don't believe me. The SNP's ultimate purpose is independence, of course, but that doesn't mean that independence or the Yes campaign is all about the SNP. Far, far from it. It's just easier, if you're against it, to pretend that it's a political party than accepting that it's a movement. The most likely thing, of course, that would happen after independence would be a breaking up of the SNP into different groups who would no longer need to present a united front in support of independence. The same, of course, would go for SNP voters. And what about Alex Salmond? Well, having reached the absolute pinnacle of his career, having delivered his life's work, it would be pretty mental if he wanted to do anything other than retire, and who could blame him? So if anything, if you want to see an end to the SNP and Alex Salmond retiring from politics, it would be strange to vote anything other than yes. At 4, it sounds serious, is it? There's no way an independent Scotland could have survived the banking crisis.
When our financial services and 2 of our banks got into very serious trouble, RBS and HBOS, it was the strength of the UK that actually saved the day.
The cost of the 2008 RBS and HBOS bailout was 66 billion. Ouch! Scottish GDP in 2008 was only 145 billion. Oh, right. So of course we could have survived it. I say survive. Deal with it really easily would be more appropriate. The real question is, would we have allowed it to happen in the first place? At 3, it's maybe the oldest argument in the book, pish though it may be.
As a Scottish rugby fan, I like to see the English getting stuffed as much as the next Scotsman, but I think we have more shared history and shared culture.
Scottish independence is just anti-Englishness.
Celebrating the murder of several hundreds of thousands of English people does not necessarily provide the best base on which to move forward.
First of all, the UK consists of more than just Scotland and England. There's Wales and there's Northern Ireland too. You'd think the supporters of such a union would be aware of this, but apparently not. Secondly, if we must defend a point, Scottish independence supporters can count tons of English people among their ranks, just as the SNP, rather inconveniently, have English MSPs on their benches. It's about democracy, not where you were born or what your accent is. It's about self-determination. And that's why the people who'll be voting in the referendum are the ones who live here. And who gives a hoot where they were born? Other than the no campaigners, obviously, they do actually seem to care.
Those struck me as slightly strange that my husband, who is English, and has lived in Scotland for many years will get a vote on Scotland's future, whereas my sister, who is Scottish but lives in England and has done for a similar length of time, will not be able to vote.
Closing in on the top spot at number 2, it's that old defeatist when all else fails line.
There are too many unanswered questions in the debate over Scottish independence.
There are lots and lots of questions.
Unanswered questions.
It actually poses far more questions than it answers.
There's just too many unanswered questions. Well, given that most of those questions tend to be some variation on all the things in this video, perhaps the complaint should really be all of our scaremongering questions keep getting answered quite sensibly. If you're a no campaigner, that must be quite annoying. The thing is that everything that happens in the future is unknown, whether we're independent or not. One thing we can surely agree on, though, is that the more control we, that's the people who live in Scotland, have over that future, the less unknowable it becomes. Which brings us to the most popular Unionist myth ever. That's right, taking the top spot for the umpteenth time, in at number 1 by a country mile.
That they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Yep, we are all a bunch of raving nationalists obsessed with Braveheart, Mel Gibson and the past. Actually, I think that's a clip from a different film. That's embarrassing. Ironically though, when it comes to nationalism, flag waving and patriotism, you need look no further than the No campaign. They never shut up about it.
I'm Scottish and British. I'm proud to be Scottish. I'm very patriotic.
What makes me not patriotic? Just because I don't want independence?
I'm very patriotic, and it's because I'm patriotic that I don't want independence.
If you like this video, please share it. Share it with a yes supporter, share it with a no supporter. It's fine, they're alright once you get to know them. Not Alistair Darling, obviously, he's weird, but some of them are alright. Like it, comment on it, watch it again. Most importantly though, stay informed and vote yes in 2014.